Welcome back, everyone. Today we get to see how a disaster has unfolded across 2024. Warner Brothers Games know that 2024 has been bad. The CEO, David Zaslav, even said they recognize the game business is substantially underperforming. That's what he said in their recent earnings call, but it's not just Suicide Squad. Far from it, actually. Today, we'll dive into their financial losses and basically how in pursuing live services, they truly have screwed themselves. And if you think Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League was the only disaster of that scale, it very much looks like there's another one on the horizon. First up then, the earnings call. So it had them own up to their game division's underperformance, and this time the biggest blow was Multiversus. Now, it's a strange game. It was shut down, then it was relaunched, and now they've declared another $100 million plus impairments, mostly attributed to Multiversus, which means they absolutely expected that game to hit stronger and to make more money than it did. And when they say impairments in this context, that's basically them declaring that an asset has decreased in its value. And they even highlight that this brings their total write-downs to a lovely $300 million this year. That is the cost of making an entire Spider-Man 2, or like 2 normal AAA games. And the other $200 million was in large part thanks to Suicide Squad. Looking into the immediate future, though, they don't actually see Q4 as being that bad, but it's definitely not for a good reason. They highlighted that last Q4 they released Hogwarts Legacy on the Switch, and this year they actually expect flat or slightly better year-on-year performance, but because they've lowered their costs, not actually because they're selling more games. And that is a big problem, because Multiversus and Quidditch Champions, those are live service games. Obviously, Suicide Squad failed, so they're not going to be counting in revenue for it, but this shows that those two games are really not doing what they were supposed to do for the company's finances. And compared to most, Multiversus has had a bloody strange life, and it's in a dire position. So Multiversus is essentially Smash Bros, but with Warner Bros properties, and it's a simple premise. It's the debut title from Player First Games. They formed in 2019. Basically, it seems to make this game. And looking through the game credits, you can see that up to 2022, there were 58 people from that company working on the game, plus, of course, loads of Warner Bros people covering like QA, admin, accounting, all of that stuff, as well as some partner studios. So sizable enough, but absolutely not gargantuan. And looking at them and LinkedIn right now, we do see 11 to 50 employees. I'd say it's almost certainly at the higher end of that, but the point basically is this is not a super big expensive game. And in a way, that was almost their problem. You see, compared to most, this has had an absolutely wild ride. So the early access launched late July 2022 with 153k concurrents in Steam, and that is just on Steam. This is, of course, a multi-platform game. Now, by late August, the peak daily players had fallen to 25k, but that is not an entirely unexpected thing. Most games do not retain their launch peak. It's generally how many people do you retain, and then from that basis, how do you slowly grow over time? That is the kind of live service playbook. So that didn't mean they were immediately doomed. August actually saw them hit 10 million players, and just a month later, they had surpassed 20 million players, but on Steam had dipped below 10k concurrents. The drop-off was becoming concerning, but what was actually quite surprising to most is just how quickly it would plummet after that. Just 2 months later, November 2022, it was consistently below 3k in Steam, and by early 23, that number had halved. Weekly peak players fell to below 1,000 by March, and soon cratered to well under 100 players. And that's because WB Games announced that the open beta would end the following June, and the game would return in 2024. So obviously people decided, I'm not going to bother sticking around for the last 3 months. This was of course not a planned thing, because when the beta launched, they said it would be there to stay. So it's easy to see what happened here. Player numbers were plummeting. They essentially ran out of steam. And when we looked through how that happened, sort of play by play, month by month, player interest dwindled as the cadence of new characters and maps slowed down. The seasons didn't retain people, and the challenge they had is they were a small team with a game that was absolutely just beyond critical mass in its initial success. And that meant that they had loads of bugs to fix, loads of balance issues, and even to this day there still are bugs, there still are balance issues. This type of game is very hard to get right. Nintendo are the absolute pros, and Nintendo are the people who this audience would be comparing the game to, so the bar was extremely high. And essentially with them continually having to triage, to fix balance, to fix bugs, they weren't able to keep up with the content cadence, and the player base pretty much just melted away. And it all happened in a way that left a bad taste in people's mouths, because people had bought Founders Packs, people had bought in-game currency, and the message essentially was, well, thanks for buying that stuff, you'll be able to access it again when it's the full release of the game. So it is abundantly clear that the fundamentals of Multiversus needed to be reworked. And yes, that means they had to ensure people got characters and maps, they said as much in their shutdown post, but we also all know that the line must go up. Not the player line, the money line. That's the one that WB Games cares about. This game either could not generate the revenue per user that they wanted, or proved that its total audience would end up being smaller than anticipated, meaning they needed more revenue per user. All of that pointed towards also updating the business model for the game. And 2024's full release absolutely proves that. And by the way, now that you're here, if you'd like more in this channel, honestly, just do me a favor, click the subscribe button. The reason why I say that is it gives the algorithm a positive signal. That helps our videos get out there. You guys have been great the last few days on that. And what that does is gets our videos out to more people. That means more revenue. That means you can invest back in the team. And this virtuous happy cycle gets to continue. So it would help me out a lot. It's just a few seconds. And with that said, let's talk about Multiversus V2, because oh my god, it's quite something. To put it simply, they went way deeper into free-to-play in a way that would very much remind people of mobile games. And there's so many aspects here, but I'll just do a few. One example is characters. There's a free rotation of characters, and if you want characters, you either grind up currency or you basically pay up. Now in the beta, the character unlocks that were paid did not apply to offline play, and that meant that if you were doing a local tournament, well, that was fine. Obviously, that's not the case now. So if you want to do a local tournament, you are going to have to buy all of the characters to basically have the tournament. And this is something that's rough for the fighting games community. A lot of that is so goddamn grassroots. Small tournaments, like clubs, small events. So the way that this monetization worked with just IRL tournaments, that was really rough. But there is more stuff, like rifts. Rifts are basically the solo PvE mode, and they want you to grind those really bad. So whenever you're grinding through those, you'll get gems, and the gems are gacha style power-ups. If you get dupes, then it goes into like XP or whatever for the gem. There are free and paid ways to get more gem XP, and you can straight up buy progression on the store. If you want to defeat the harder rifts, well, you'll probably need good gems. And also, there are limited lives a day, and you could purchase more. So that's quite bad. And what really shows how much this is a game in flux, where they haven't quite worked out their model yet, is unlocking characters. They had one currency for that in beta, then they launched with another currency, and now it's being replaced with an entire new system that is called Fighter Road, where rather than directly earn currency, you now progress through a track, and that means you're earning a new type of XP as well, Fighter XP. And that just means that this is a game that's chopping and changing. They still haven't quite figured out how all of these systems should work. And more broadly since release, they've had to backtrack in some things. They've grappled with loads of bugs, balance problems, they've had to think a lot about quality of life. And the bit that's sad is that beneath all of that, this is a fantastic platform fighter. There are a few designs that are truly inspired, and when all's going right, it plays remarkably well. But the struggle is, it's a small team, and keeping players around has proven challenging here. The other side to this then is that in the background, WB Games actually acquired the studio. We found out about this in July, but obviously that deal would have been in progress long before that. And of course, with Multiversus seeming to have a strong second launch, numbers, projections must have looked good when that deal was being made. But those numbers would not last, and that certainly holds true for their entire games library. Okay, Quidditch Champions, Multiversus, and Suicide Squad. Let's check in on how these games are doing. First, these are all multi-platform games, right? So take Steam as an indicator of trends, but not as an absolute number. The absolute numbers will be substantially higher because of other platforms. Anyway, Multiversus launched to 114k concurrents, but within weeks, the monthly peaks were down to 5k. After that, they were hovering between 3k and 2k, but now they have fallen below 2k. That is fairly rough. Now, the performance is not dissimilar to the beta, though I do imagine the revenue per user is higher. But again, this is grim. Warner Bros. Did attribute being down 100 million to the weak performance of this game, and that means their projections of the redesigned business model and the new launch must have been wildly above reality. Now the game is entering its 4th season, and based on how the beta ended, where the numbers just got so low that they pulled the plug, I really am concerned for the future of that game, which, to be clear, would be a shame, right? Because Multiversus has the makings of a truly fantastic platform fighter. Our next game then is Quidditch Champions, and I certainly hope they did not make projections based on Hogwarts, because if they did, this game will have barely made a dent. It's got a 77% Steam average, which is fairly good, but only 1900 ratings, which is fairly soft, especially for this IP. Beyond Steam, it's got a 66% open critics average, with only 26% of critics recommending, which is fairly low. Basically, the story is, if you want Quidditch, this is where you can get some Quidditch. But it just turns out that not that many people seem to want Quidditch. Now, in terms of player numbers, they went from a launch peak of 6,500 to weekly peaks of under 500. Now, there is one of those things in the industry and in commentary where we can obsess over player concurrency numbers. And I get that. And in a game like, say, Veilguard, or like a single-player game, or even a regular multiplayer game that wasn't a big live service, I wouldn't really care about them as much. But here, these are live games. They actually do need to have consistent play to earn their money back, to make seasonal events and things actually be worth it. So that's why these lower numbers are kind of concerning. As an example, for Quidditch Champions, it's got seasonal events, new pitches, new characters, cosmetics, and of course, seasons. They're just about to start Season 1, which does have a ranked 6v6 mode, so maybe that can capture interest. We'll just have to wait and see, but either way, it is not going to make a dent for WB Games. Finally then, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. It's currently about 2/3 the size of Quidditch on Steam, but recently it surged. However, not for the right reasons. We can see a mid-September Steam sale that took it from the low hundreds to a peak of 500. Then at the start of October, Season 3 launched, and you can see that the Season 3 launch is barely noticeable on the graph, and the most recent spike is because of another 80% off sale. And by the way, 80% off is a lot of percent. For some fun examples, Nintendo basically don't discount their games that much, ever. And some of their games they don't run sales on. Factorio just sold its second DLC for $35, and I don't think Factorio has ever done a sale. Just goes to show how the market decides what a game is really worth. Now, we know this game underperformed directly from WB Games, but get this, as of August, it was ranked the 15th top-selling game of 2024 per Circana's tracker. Funnily enough, though, Hogwarts, which released a year earlier, was 10th on that tracker, which really does show us both how, yes, this did get substantial, or at least some launch sales, but also just how weak 2024 has been for game sales. So it's safe to say then that for WB Games, everything they have done this year has been a disaster, which begs the question, what next? How are they doomed? And at the top of this video, I did say they have another Suicide Squad-like situation in their hands, so we'll talk about that too. Overall, WB Games has 11 studios, and of course the big hitters are Rocksteady, Monolith as well. Monolith made the Lord of the Rings Shadow games, NetherRealm, who make Mortal Kombat, Avalanche, not the Swedish Avalanche, who made Hogwarts, and TT Games, who are the people who do the Lego games. And in the earnings call, they said their plans to double down on the big franchises, meaning Mortal Kombat, Game of Thrones, Hogwarts, and DC, with Batman in particular. And that's going to be rough, because we know that Monolith are working on a Wonder Woman game, and it's not one that I've got high hopes for, even though that studio has produced truly fantastic work in the past. You see, just a few months ago, we heard via Greg Miller that it is a troubled game, and we've been wondering where the hell it is. And that does stand to reason. You see, just 3 years after 2014's brilliant Shadow of Mordor, that studio released Shadow of War. And Shadow of War was a great game, ruined by monetization. It was peak WB Games bullshit. But that's actually it. And now that we've crossed October, it has been just over 7 years since that game came out. 7 years, and they've been working on Wonder Woman ever since, it would seem. And that means that the parallels between this Wonder Woman game with Monolith and the Suicide Squad game with Rocksteady, they're kind of obvious. Now, we do understand that Hogwarts is getting a sequel, which makes complete sense, and Batman was named in the earnings call, so I imagine that's going to be something from Rocksteady that is more along their wheelhouse. Of course, Mortal Kombat is Mortal Kombat, NetherRealm do a great job there, and they also mentioned Game of Thrones. Now, there is an awful mobile Game of Thrones game, which you should never go anywhere near, but perhaps if they're okay funding big RPGs, like, say, Hogwarts, and they maybe look around at the rest of the market, they see Elden Ring, they see Baldur's Gate, they see that big fantasy games can actually do well, maybe they would decide to do something in the Game of Thrones IP. Hard to say. One thing is for sure, though. like the rest of the industry, they have learnt their lessons painfully, burning hundreds of millions of dollars in the process, all trying to make the live service line go up. And if you would like a similarly wild story, take a look at what EA are doing to try to make the Apex line go up next in this video.